Hey, how about 2 batteries? Now I know why it went off. Take 2, or even take 3. We'll take that. All right, I'll just throw that back there. That'll make that okay. All right, amazing experiences in the book of Genesis, chapter 5. Thank you for being here, and we're going to end up starting in Genesis chapter 5, of course, moving into Genesis chapter 6. But before we can get there, we're going to ask some good questions. Now, before we get into the good questions, again, you guys have had some amazing and wonderful questions, and anytime that you have a question as we're going through here, please feel free to ask. Please do, because it helps, because if you have a question, chances are somebody else has it as well. And we're going to get into a couple things this evening that are going to give you some questions, all right? I know that ahead of time, and I can't promise that I have all of the answers, but if you ask one that stumps me, I'll at least do some study and work and get back to you. But at the most part, we'll see how we can do and what we can do as we move forward with it. So let's see where we're going to be going. We've got our good questions. The first one was Lamech alive when the ark was being built? Now, we touched on Lamech last week. He was Noah's father. Said some interesting things about Noah that we'll touch on here in a second. But was he around for that time? Was Noah the father of triplets? Because as we went down and studied the godly line of Seth, we saw that it was following the father and the son, the ones that kept that going. And when it comes to Noah, all of a sudden, instead of one son, he lists 3. Why? And this is a bonus one. It's not up there, but was Noah, or I guess it is up there. Why? Was Noah bad at naming his kids? I'll spoil this one ahead of time. If I'm asking it, yes. Okay? All right. Who were the sons of God mentioned in Genesis chapter 6 and verse number 2? That's a good question, and we're going to find out. Who are the Nephilites, and does that describe their size or their character? Good question, because it is a descriptive thing, and it is going to cover one of those. Maybe both, but we'll get there. How was the world before the flood governed? How was it ruled? We'll get there, and I think you're going to have some of your answer. And what was God's verdict on mankind? Now, I know I'm not spoiling this, okay? I know everybody who's aware of what chapter 6 and beyond is the flood. So there was a verdict, and God weighed in on it, and we're going to talk about why. Better? All right. So we're going to start with Genesis chapter 5 and verse number 30 this evening. After the birth of Noah, Lamech lived another 595 years. He had other sons and daughters, and Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. And after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, we learned last week that Lamech was 182 when he had Noah. 182. So, we know just in relative ways of speaking that at 182, Noah was 500 when God talked to him. So Lamech lived to see many of the years of the ark's construction. Because if you add 182 to 500, you come up with 682. And we know that Lamech died when he was 777, and the flood came roughly 100 years after Abraham was 500 when he was 600, which would make it 782. So we're just seeing that Lamech missed seeing all that by a couple of years. So if that's the case, he didn't get to go on the ark, but he missed that by about 5 years. So Lamech, who looked at his son and said, "You're different. You're special. I'm naming you Noah," which means rest. And I believe that God is going to do something with you that is going to bring that about. Was able to see that God had spoke to his son and that God was going to use him to do something. He knew, because I'm sure Noah told Dad what was going on, that God had spoke to him. Because when son starts to build something enormous in his backyard, a boat with no water around, you know Dad walked up to him at some point and went, son, can we talk? Why are you doing this? Well, Dad, I didn't want to worry you, but... And he was able to explain what was going on and what was happening. Did Lamech help build the ark? Ready? Well, super spiritual answer. Ready? Maybe. We have no word that he did. We have no word that he didn't. But it wouldn't be the first time that a father helped his son in a construction project, right? So chances are at some point he probably did help with something. We don't know. Maybe he didn't help with anything. Maybe he was too busy trying to warn his other kids and get them right before everything happened. I'm not sure. Because you have to realize that Noah had other brothers and sisters. We were just told so, other sons and daughters. And so there was a crowd of people that were involved in this that at least knew of what was happening, heard of what was going on. Because brotherly rivalry is a thing, right? And I'm sure one of them probably said to one of the others, a sibling rivalry, however you want to look at it. The crazy brother's building something in his backyard. Thinks there's going to be a flood. Whatever that is, right? Because they had never had one and they didn't know what it was. So, was Noah the father of triplets? Well, at 500, when God calls him to build the ark, he was the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And I want you to see that they are all three mentioned, not necessarily because they were triplets. They were mentioned for a specific reason, that they were there when God called him. Now, remember, this is following that godly line of Seth. It was following that godly line that was showing those people who were still living for and following God while this crazy world that they were living in was rapidly decaying quickly in front of their very eyes. But yet, it was still this family line that was going down. And we come that it was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we see that all three are mentioned because they were going to be there for a special part. God was going to use them in a special way. So, they were going to be used as well. We know, I'm not going to spoil anything for everybody because I'm pretty sure you know the story. Those three ended up on the ark. All three of them. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And God was going to use all of them to continue to repopulate the world after the flood. So because of that, all three of them are there enlisted. And let's talk about their names, because my question was Noah good? Well, Noah wasn't the best at naming his kids, all right? Just wasn't. Look at Shem. His name means name. No, we got to name the kid. I don't know what to name him. Me neither. What should we name him? I don't know what to name him. Wait a minute. We keep saying name. I don't know if it went that way or not, but the poor kid's name was Name, which is weird, right? And look at Ham. Ham meant hot. Ham could have been born in the middle of August. I don't know. But for whatever reason, Ham was hot. And Japheth meant opened. So you have name, hot, and opened as the three sons that God was going to use to repopulate the world. You can't make this stuff up, right? It's there, and this is what it means. But all three were listed because God was going to use all of them, regardless of their names. Even if they had some of the worst names that were there, that they were still going to be used, God had a plan for them. Because again, it doesn't matter what someone's name is, it doesn't matter where someone is from. What matters is their hearts. And Shem, Ham, and Japheth all had the right hearts. And they were going to live and serve God. They were going to help their father build this enormous thing that God was asking them to build, and they were going to willingly be a part of it. Now, did they complain? I'm sure they were human and did once or twice, because Noah probably did too, right? Let's just be honest. But their hearts were right, and God was going to use them to make this a reality. So what happens next? Well, we're going to find ourselves now turning to chapter 6. And in chapter 6, we begin to expand on what was going on in the world. So let's look and see in chapter 6 and verse number 1. Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and the daughters were born to them. And the sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any that they wanted as their wives. And then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. And in their future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. So as we look at this, I asked this in our good questions, and we'll ask it again. Who are the sons of God? Now, to answer that question, we're going to first look at who they were not before we can talk about who they are, okay? And the one that we need to talk about first is this. They were not angels, okay? So this is not referring to angels. Angels were never referred to as sons of God. They were always messengers of God. And angels, again, were never mentioned this way. As a matter of fact, what we get from angels is from Jesus was when we get to heaven, we are going to be like the angels who were neither given or have marriage. So that's not something that angels do, all right? So this isn't talking about angels. So then who was this talking about? They were the sons from the godly line of Seth, okay? And here's why we say this. From that godly line of Seth, we see, and we saw last week from Hall chapter 5, and hopefully some of you went back through and read some of chapter 5. I know it was boring, but you made it. Thank you. But as you went through, you saw that line kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going. But on multiple times, just like what we read with Lamech, and they had many other sons and daughters, many other sons and daughters, many other sons and daughters, many other sons and daughters. But it was this one who was following the right way. It was this one who was following God. And so they were also then this. Remember, they were in Adam's image, all right? Adam was in God's image, so they were in the image of God. They were the sons of God. And so this godly line of Seth was the one that was representing that image in this world. But that image, well, for some of them it was marred because not all of the relatives of Seth served God. Not all of them did. Some of them did. Some of them didn't. We have record of the ones who did. But as you're going to see here in a couple minutes, when God starts talking about this world that they're living in, that there really wasn't anybody else. Even Noah's brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, saw Uncle Noah building the ark, heard their brother building the ark and giving them the warning, and yet they still didn't do it. They still didn't believe. They still didn't change. So with all of that said, I want you to see that we're talking about that godly line of Seth. And in that godly line of Seth, they didn't follow. They let their hearts turn away. They did anything they wanted, and we see the results of that in the world. And we also have this mentioned, that there would be 120 years for man to live. And here's my question for you this evening. Was it man to live 120 years, or man had 120 years left to live? Because if you do the math from where this was said, it pretty much takes you right up to the flood. As a matter of fact, if you look at answers in Genesis, this is what they say is what this verse means, is that it meant that there was 120 years left until the judgment came with the flood. Maybe. But we know that most people don't live 120 right now, right? As a matter of fact, it just came out this week that our average age in America is 79. Life expectancy is now 79. It's used to be in the 80s, but it's not anymore. Fentanyl, other things hampered that, drug overdoses. But lifespan in the U.S. is 79. In other places like Switzerland, it's 100 or it's 84. You know, you got other countries where it's 85. But you get the idea. For us, it's kind of on the decline. But we don't have anybody routinely living to 120. Not much, right? So that was what people were going to live to? Or was that 120 years and then there was going to be a judgment? We can go either way on it. If it makes sense to you that way, if you feel right about it, great. It's there. It's one of the ways it's being mentioned. And I thought it was good enough to bring it up Questions? Do I have anybody? Because I don't want to lose anybody there. Yes, sir.
So let's make sure I said right. So at this point, when we're talking about 120 years, it's actually 120 years till the flood takes place.
Yes. But it also could be the 120 years of nobody's going to live past that because people have been living 600-700 years plus. Lamech was 777, but he was no Methuselah, right? So it could be either way in that. I just thought in the studying with the answers in Genesis that they put it that it was 120 years to the flood, and that it could also mean this, that I wanted to bring it before you because I don't know. And that was, I read it and it was like, yeah, and then I started doing the dates and figuring it out, and I'm like, wow, they're right, it is 120 years until the flood. Okay, the math works. So I couldn't argue that it doesn't work that way because it did. But is it really that? I mean, when what we call the Middle Ages, you're lucky to live to 40, right? And so our life expectancy is a lot longer than what it was then, but we're still not hitting that mark. Ginger's side has, they live a long time, okay? She should outlive me by how everything works because she's had a great-grandmother that was 100. Her grandmother now is pushing 90. I mean, they live long on that side of the family, which is another reason to pray for the mother-in-law aspect. We'll add that to the prayers. But regardless, 120, I don't know anybody that old. If you do, great, but we haven't had too many people past that. So it could go either way. I'm okay with that, and we can go from there. Don't want to lose anybody, though. Anybody else? All right, look at what happens next in verse number 4, because this one we probably will get some questions on as we work our way through. In those days and sometime after, giant Nephilites lived on earth, for when the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes of famous warriors of ancient times. So let's answer this question then. Since we asked about the sons of God and who they were, who were the Nephilites, right? Well, just like we did with the sons of God, let's start with what they're not. They were not demons. Again, angels are just fallen. Angels are fallen. Fallen angels, which are demons, or otherwise are not made sexual. That's what Jesus told us. So that rules that out, right? So let's go to the words that were used. And so we go back to the Hebrew. And the Hebrew word here used literally means giants fall. Okay? But not like a giant tripped and came down. Think of it more like the giant's shadow fell on you. The giant's power fell on you. Okay? That would be the more accurate idea of it. But giant is one of the ways that this word is translated. So it does describe size. So we got that, right? But since we know that they're not saying giants, then the word Nephilite speaks to their character and not their size. Okay. In what we just read, that there were giants, that there were Nephilites on the earth. So they're not going to say giants. There were giants on the earth, right? We're not going to go there. So it was used to describe the type of giants that they were. It's a descriptive word. And it speaks more than just giants falling, okay? When you talk about character, sorry, I'm getting nerdy. I'm going to lose somebody. I got to stop. Well, let me try to do this a little better, right? When you're using this word Nephilite, it can either describe the size, the giant, and its power, or it can describe its character, all right? So if we hear from Scripture that it was giant Nephilites, then it would be giant, and that doesn't make sense. So we see that it's after giant, so it's describing giant. Since it's describing giant, then we can lean into the character definition. What's the character definition? I'm glad you asked, even though you didn't, but let's pretend you did. The word Nephilites also is defined, remember we're speaking as character, as reckless ferocity, impious daring character, and those who spread destruction and carnage. So, when you add that together with this idea of the giants falling, the shadow of the giant falling, or the power of the giant falling on you, with the character aspect of it, we can say that since we know that they're not saying, we can say that this speaks to their character, that they were not just big, they were big and mean. They were big and powerful, and you did what they said. You didn't have much of a choice. If they beat you, if they conquered you, you did what they said. And this shows us how the world before the flood was governed. Strength and might won the day. And yes, some were heroes, some won battles, some set them free from others who were, over them. Yes, all of that happened. But for the most part, they were people who, by their size, by their strength, by their power, would rule over people, and that's their definition. Now, that was how the world was ruled in those days and for some time after. And remember, giants were around in many instances in the Bible. We just spent some time looking at David and Goliath. There was a ladder here that gave you the giant size. So we know that they were around there, that he had brothers. Even before we get to Goliath, when the Israelites were going and exploring the promised land, the spies said, we can't go in there. There are giants all over the place. So we know that there are men of abnormal size, correct? Yes. But we still have men above average size and strength today, right? I mean, maybe not 9 foot plus, but we know of people within this century that have had close to that size. Like this picture here. This is Robert Wadlow. And I first saw him when Ginger and I were in Niagara Falls and we went through Ripley's Believe It or Not. Now, he wasn't there because he died in 1940, okay? But they had his statue there so that you could stand up and look at and see how tall he was. He was 8 foot 11 inches tall. And again, he died in 1940. Goliath was over 9 feet tall, so we're talking inches away from Goliath. I mean, because at 8'11", he's just a foot away from being 9 foot tall. All right? And that gives you his size because those were two of the tallest women in the town when they took that picture. So this just kind of gives you an idea of his size. And then you have people like Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, I know he's not 8 foot tall, but he's a big man, right? Ginger's sister has more money than sense, right? She bought a joke gift for my 16-year-old when he turned 16 because his feet were growing and growing and growing. She was at some TJ Maxx or something, found a pair of shoes for $5 that were in the 20s. So it was 21. Shaq's shoe is a size bigger than that. Okay? And this thing is just absolutely huge. Carter put them on and they look like clown shoes. I kid you not. It was like 2 of my shoes. It was enormously huge, and Shaq's was bigger. And just that alone was like, wow, right? So we still have people of enormous size and strength today. And since Robert here, we haven't had any 8-plussers, but you've had the Manute Bowles at 7-something, and we've had people of that size. The Ralph Sampson, I'm going way back there now, I'll stop. But you get the idea, right? We get the idea. So they were of big size, they were giants, they were ruled by force, and we get that, all right? Any questions on them before we move on? I don't want to confuse anybody.
From what I've seen and heard, so the giants were technically another branch from Adam and Eve, yes?
They are described as being relatives to the Canaanites most often. But that ended with the flood. So after the flood, they were just the descendants of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. So again, the most, Goliath being the one that we know the most, didn't come from the Canaanites, came from one of the others. But big people were randomly born, right? And small people have been randomly born. So it goes back and forth on that. So it's not necessarily that they came from a demon or an offspring of this or that, because that doesn't work, that doesn't happen. But we see it this way, right? Okay, good question, by the way. Very good question. Anybody else? Don't want to miss it. All right, then let's see what happens in verse number 5. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth and saw that everything they thought or imagined was constantly and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he ever made them and put them on the earth. and it broke his heart. So everything that they thought was constantly and totally evil. And this is the reason for the why of what's to come. God is going to set some things in motion, and this is why. Because this people had turned away from him, had gone away from him in such great possibility of they didn't even worship him. It was not even on their minds. It wasn't on their hearts. They didn't live for him. They didn't serve him. They did what they want, to the point that it was constantly, totally evil. That's really evil, okay? That every thought, every imagination, everything that they had strived towards evil. So they refused to live their lives for or to honor God. And we know something else, all right? We know that the world will get closer to this before the rapture. Jesus told us, as it was in the days of Noah, it's going to be when he returns. So that not only means that there'll be people who will be given in marriage, life will be happening right up to the moment of the flood, but we know that the world is going to get darker as it goes as well. But are we seeing this happen? Are we starting to see the world get darker? Are we starting to see the world and evil grow? Are we seeing it happen? Well, kind of, right? I think there's a good argument that we could say that that's coming that way. And so, since we know that the rapture and all that's going to be happening like the days of Noah, that judgment will be coming and everybody will just be running head towards it, that they'll be turning their backs on God, that they'll be trying to live their own way, doing their own thing, we can see that happening. And so there's some corollaries that we can make along the way as well. But next, all of that made God's heart broke. It broke God's heart. This was his creation. This is who he made. He breathed the breath of life in them. And to see his creation just willingly and knowingly walk away from him had to have just broke his heart. It not just says so, but I can't imagine what was going through his head to make this decision that he was about to say. Look at verse 7. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, all of the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. So, God is going to destroy every living thing. He was so sorry that he made them that he had to destroy them. And this is hard for us to grasp, but we can try and understand it. I don't know how hard it would be if my son's committed a crime to look at him and say, okay, I'm calling the cops. Because I would. Just to let you know, I would. Bonus. That's what they'll take home from this, right? But I would, because it would be the right thing to do. Now, I guess we can kind of extrapolate that out, that God's looking at his creation and knows that they've done wrong and knows that he has to punish them. Yet with the coming judgment, someone found favor with God. So yes, God tells us he's going to destroy the world. We don't know how yet, right? Those of us who know it's the flood, we've read ahead, you've looked, you know. But he doesn't say that yet. He just says he's going to destroy the world, everything that lives, everything destroyed, wiped out, starting over because of judgment, because of sin, because this is happening because they were evil. This is happening because they just sat around trying to invent new evil things to do. But yet, while all of that was going on, there was someone who found favor. We could say there was someone who found grace. There was someone who found God's mercy. And in the midst of judgment, we also have this picture of grace. Now, this picture of grace is going to take some work. It's going to take some faith. It's going to take some trust. But in the end, we're going to see that when judgment comes, that there is indeed grace and mercy and love. Both of these things are going to be happening. And yes, something different is going to happen with Noah. God's not going to treat him the same way that he treats everyone else. Okay? So that brings us to some more good questions. Again, the questions are free and I'm in a giving mood, so let's go through some more. All right, that was a bad joke, but I had to. How was Noah different? Because if Noah is different, if he's found favor, what is it about Noah that separates him from the rest? What did God ask Noah to build? And while we're talking about it, has anything to that extent ever been built before? Good questions, right? How long was it going to take to build a boat that big? He gives him a good time frame to do it in. How were the animals going to get to the ark? I mean, they were all over the place. Was Noah going to have to stop building the ark to go on a safari, right? And then how is he going to know which one was the boy and which one was the girl? How is any of this going to work, right? Especially when it comes to the bugs. They're ladybugs, I don't know, right? How is that going to happen? How is it going to work? How many of each kind were coming aboard the ark? Now, just don't say 2 yet, right? Okay? Just realize that there might be an addendum that we add on there, okay? And how would Noah know that he had enough food? That was really a bad question, because Noah know? That wasn't good, because it's hard to even say. But how would Noah know that he had enough food? God tells him to make sure you have enough food. How would you know how much food to have? Because he didn't know what all these animals were. He didn't even know what they ate, right? Because there's probably some that came his way that he's like, I don't know what that is, and I know what they eat. Oh, they just got one of the sheep. Now we know what it eats, but let's tie that up then just to be safe, right? Because there's all kinds of things that are going to be happening. So how does he know how much food? And how does he know how much food to really put on? Because how long is he going to be on the ark? Well, 40 days and 40 nights, right? We'll find out. Okay. So let's start to answer some of these good questions. We'll look at Genesis chapter 6, beginning with verse number 9. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on the earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. Noah was the father of three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And now God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. And God observed that all of this corruption in the world, for everyone on the earth was corrupt. So we are told that Noah was a righteous man. And that is the distinction that separates Noah from everyone else that was alive at this time. So let's look at the Hebrew words that were used there so we can get an idea of what this means, that why he was so different. Well, the Hebrew word for righteous used here literally means justified and vindicated by God. So we see a direct correlation happening. We see that there is a side-by-side. We see that there was constantly evil and they were inventing ways to do wrong, and it was all they thought about. It happened all the time. And then over here there was someone who was different. He was righteous. He was justified. He was made right. Through faith, he believed. And vindicated by God. He was forgiven. That's a good way for us to think of it. The Hebrew word for blameless used here literally means entirely in accord with truth and fact. So Noah was different because he lived God's truth. He believed what God said as fact. So he lived different than everyone else. He took God's word and what God spoke to him, and he lived by it. So Noah's character is different than what we see in the world that he's living in. He was different. As a matter of fact, he was so different that we have him described in this way, that he lived in close fellowship with God, and his relationship with God was different. Literally, lived in a special or different relationship with God by the wording that's used here. So he was different because he lived in a different way. He lived in fellowship or in a relationship with God. And I want you to see that Noah passes his character on to his 3 sons. And this is why all 3 of them are counted as being part of that godly line of Seth. Again, it would have been easy for them to point out if it was Seth or it was Ham or if it was Japheth. Where did the Messiah come from? What line did it go down? Well, there is an answer to that. But I want you to see that all 3 of them were counted as that godly line because God was going to use all 3 of them to keep them safe from judgment. Again, they were going to be set apart just like Noah was from the rest of the world. So Noah was a righteous man. And Noah's character is being compared and contrasted to that of the world at this time. And understand that God calls this world corrupt. Not only does he say that there was an extreme amount of violence, when you look up what the Hebrew word that's used here for corrupt means, it means marred, spoiled, and ruined. And not spoiled like food, kind of spoiled like food gone bad, not spoiled like a brat. It was the bad part, that it had gone the wrong direction, that it wasn't good any longer. And so this is the comparison. The righteous man who lived in fellowship with God and his family and everybody else. And that's the comparison that we're given. When Noah and his family got on the ark, after Lamech passed away, there were still those 5 years. That was really it. Noah and Mrs. Noah, Shem and Mrs. Shem, Japheth and Mrs. Japheth, Ham and Mrs. Ham, that was it. 8. And however many else. Sometimes we feel like we're the only one living for God. That's not true. There's all kinds of people everywhere who are living for God. But back then, they might not have been the only one, but they were one of 8, okay? They really had a lot shorter odds. And I want you to see that this was the comparison and contrast. They were being guilty. They had sinned. They were going to be judged. These people learned how to find forgiveness and were justified. They found grace. So, God is about to let Noah know that he's choosing him to do something. And a lot of times when you hear God, I'm say, I'm going to choose you to do something, it's like, it's great, right? Until you hear what he asks him to do, right? Look at verse 13. So God said to Noah, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. And yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth. Build a large boat from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar inside and out, and then construct decks and stalls throughout its interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, and leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around the boat. And put the door on the side and build 3 decks inside of the boat, lower, middle, and upper. So, God speaks to Noah. And Noah was in close relationship with God. So I believe God spoke to Noah many times because, again, Noah in faith believed. He had to believe God's word, so I know that there was communication that happened. But God tells Noah that he's going to destroy the world and everything in it. Now, imagine that. God's talking to you, and he says, I'm going to destroy the world and everything in it. And you put your hand up and go, God, I'm in it. What about me? Right? Because he's in it, and God's going to destroy the world. So Noah's starting to feel, what? God probably sees it happening and then starts to tell Noah that he's going to do something. Noah, I'm choosing you. You get to go build a large boat. So God tells Noah to build a large boat. How large was it? I love the translation that we used here because it breaks down all the cubits into feet and makes it a little easier for us to grasp. It was 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. And it was going to have 3 levels, or what we would call decks, right? So lower, middle, upper, stalls, areas for food, areas for animals, areas for people, areas for a bed, all on this boat. Now in Springfield, there's a building that's built almost with these exact dimensions. Just down the road in Springfield, Ohio, if you ever want to go see it. It's in there downtown. But why do that when you can drive down into Kentucky and see this, right? Because again, Answers in Genesis built the replica of the ark. And they built it with those exact dimensions. It's 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. And they put 3 decks in it with the 18-inch window space, all of that. And so, if you ever get curious, you can go down there, look around, walk around, and see at least the size and scope of it. So if you don't want to go to Springfield and walk around, you can go there, right? And you can see it. But here's a good question. That thing's big. Cypress wood, right? There were no Lowe's back then. No Home Depot. You couldn't call up Carter Yarn Lumber and say, make a delivery. You had to go source your own material. Bring the wood back. Make it into usable parts and pieces to do that. Now, I love it that it's nice and brown, but if you cover it with tar, it's not going to be that nice to look at, okay? And anybody ever mess with some tar? You sticky, nasty, ugh, right? But it did make it watertight. You're going to see something that's described as an ark when we get into Exodus with Moses. It was a basket, pitch and tar the same way, and it was waterproof, and they put this basket that had holes in it because it was covered in the river, and it floated. So it has that idea of making things watertight and water resistant. And so this was going to be a big boat. Now, if you're Noah and you're hearing God tell you you're going to make this with these dimensions and this size, and before you can say why, God gives Noah the why. You ready? Look at verse 17. Look, I am about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife, your sons and their wives, and bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat, and with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for you and your family and for all the animals. So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. So this is why you have to build a large boat. Because it's not only for you, but it's for all the animals that I'm going to keep alive. Animals, God? Yeah. And they're going to come to you. Huh? But imagine, this is why he has to do it, because God tells Noah that he's going to cover the earth with the flood. A global event means that it's going to affect the whole earth. And we'll state right here that this wasn't a localized flood. You will hear people describe that, oh, the flood was just a localized flood. No, the flood was a worldwide event. As a matter of fact, many different cultures in their written history have recordings of a flood. So this is something that we have known, we have record of, it has happened. And we see the remnants and the records of it even in our fossil records. There are fish fossils at the top of mountains. How did those get there, right? Well, there was a flood, just like the Bible said. And it happened so quickly and so rapidly that it made all of these things happen and die. That's why we have the fossil layers that we do. It's like how everything died at the same time. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't this or that. It was this flood, all right? So this is what happened. So Noah now knows that the world is about to be destroyed. It's going to be a flood, whatever that is, because, again, they didn't have rain. Everything was watered like a sprinkler system. So what's a flood? So in faith, he had to believe that that was bad. And if it was going to be bad enough for everything to die, he was going to have to make this, because it sounds like it's going to be something that has to float. All right, let's do it. God was going to save Noah and his family. That's what he knew. That's what he understood. That God was going to keep him safe. That no matter what was going on, he was going to be okay. And it was going to be a large boat for 8 people and a whole lot of animals. So again, let's tackle this. How were the animals to get on the ark? Well, the animals were going to come to Noah. Noah's going to be busy enough with his construction project to go and hunt for animals of different types and kinds. He was going to be too busy for that. And God knew that he probably didn't know what every animal was, because who does? Well, some 6-year-olds, right? I know that they love going. We had a 5-year-old that liked to be a dinosaur and could tell you all kinds of things that he was doing. He would come in strutting like he was a dinosaur. And what dinosaur are you? He'd ask, what dinosaur am I? And it's like, I don't know. Oh, Andy was amazing. He was in one of our day camps, but just crazy. But there was going to be animals that came. Noah didn't know anything about that, right? But once they came, Noah had to keep them. And I would be willing to bet that many of the animals made Noah wonder, what am I doing? God, you want me to take that with me on this boat? Because that thing is going to be in there with me, right? That thing's going to be in here with me? No, thank you, right? Let's make this pen very, very sturdy so that this thing can't get out of that until it's time for it to get off, right? And how would Noah know that if he had enough food? Again, it's a great question. And I don't know. And again, in one of these decks, you know there has to be food storage. There has to be these many nooks and crannies that you can put stuff for people to eat, for animals to eat, because, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but he's going to be on there for a little bit longer than 40 days and 40 nights, okay? It's true. Oh, shock and awe. Longer than 40 days. Oh, man. Spoiled it. So at least we know and understand that he's going to have to try to come up with food, and enough food, whatever that is, for however long he's going to be on the ark. So let's look at what happens in chapter 7 in verse number 1. When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the boat with all of your family, for among all the people of the earth I can see that you alone are righteous." Again, the comparison and contrast. They've sinned. You're righteous. You're still in fellowship with me. You have been doing this in faith. So how long did it take to get everything ready? Well, Noah had all 3 sons by the time he was 500 years old. Great, we know this. So if we know that the flood started 100 years later after God spoke to him at 500 when Noah was 600, then we can deduce a few things. If the youngest son was 20 when he was married, that would mean that Noah and his family had about 80 years to build the ark. I just said that the most lifespans in America are only 79 years. And it probably took them 80 years to build the ark. So for all of what would be our lifetimes, they built the ark. It's worse than the old Dunkin' Donuts commercial where you had to get up and make the donuts, right? Because every day, for 80 years, get up, make the ark. Get up, make the ark. Get up, get food for the ark. Get up, go cut down a tree to make the ark. Get up, go find the tar. This is what he did for 80 years. And it probably required all of that time to actually accomplish it. And here's the amazing thing, all right? They built it with no power tools and a really big deadline. No power tools, no crane, no lifts, no power saws, chainsaws, none of those things. And if we believe the 120 years was all that man had left, then Noah knew a deadline because Dad probably kept reminding him, right? God told me it was only going to, God told me. So he had a deadline and a big job to do. And it probably took all of those 80 years. But I want you to see that God let them know when it was time. You see, Noah didn't know what was coming, but in faith he obeyed. Because again, I mentioned it earlier, he didn't know what a flood was, but he built the ark. He didn't know how to keep it full of anything and what was really going to come to him and what was going to require, but he supplied the ark. And then he got in the ark not knowing how long he was really going to be in it. And by the way, if this thing is supposed to float in water, how's that door going to shut? Because God never told me how to put in something that was a door closer. Okay? But in faith, Noah did. But in faith, he built. In faith, he did. I know people are still people, right? So you better believe people came by and mocked. People came by and scoffed. We know so because it says later in Scripture that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. So as these people came by, Noah took the opportunity to say, this is wrong how you're living. This is because God is going to destroy this world, which means he's going to destroy you. And they refused to listen. And they didn't care because they'd rather go on doing or living however they wanted. But God let them know it was time. Guys, you got a week. Get everything on the boat. Could you imagine God telling you that? Judgment's coming in a week. Get ready. What would you do? Well, let's see what happens with Noah. God tells him more instructions in verse number 2. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. And also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. So again, how many animals did Noah take? Well, the difference is between clean and unclean animals. And for clean and unclean animals, there was a big difference. There were 7 pairs of clean animals and birds. The ones that they could eat, the ones that they were approved to eat, those were the ones that they considered clean animals. There were all kinds of things that would gradiate that with hooves and other things, but the clean ones that they could eat, 7 pairs of those. So 14 of those. And then only 1 pair for everything else. So of certain kinds of animals, there was a lot of. It wasn't just 2 sheep. There were 14 sheep, right? Just math. Did Noah take full-size animals or babies? That's a good question, too. But my answer is this. Does it really matter? Because puppies, the dog we got for Carter, we got it because he wanted a puppy that he could hold in his hand, right? So we had a Schnauzer, and when we first got the little puppy, you could hold it in your hand for about a week because they grow quickly. I mean, just here in the news, there was a baby hippopotamus, right? That ain't no baby, right? Have you guys seen that thing? That ain't no baby. And that thing keeps growing and growing and growing. With how long they were on the ark, it didn't matter what size those things were coming on the ark, because there was a good amount of time before they got off the ark, okay? And I'm trying not to spoil that, but I want you to realize it didn't really matter. Now, when it came to the dinosaurs, I'm probably sure there were young ones, right? And that's the next one. Did Noah take full-size animals, or were there dinosaurs on the ark? Yes. Because again, from the book of Job, we have record of at least 2 things that we would probably label as dinosaurs that came around. So yes, if they were animals, if they were alive, there was at least 1 pair of them that made it on. T-Rex, raptor, the big ones. Yes, all of them were there and probably very well secured, right? Let's just be honest. But they were there as well. Now, I mentioned you've got a week, right? Where am I getting that from? Look at verse number 4, and this is where I'll end. I see my time. 7 days from now, I'll make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created. So Noah did everything the Lord commanded him. So Noah had a week to get everything on the ark and ready to go. So now Noah had a definite date. 7 days. You have a week. How long does it take you to pack for a trip? Right? I guess it depends on the who. I see the elbows that were flying there. It's okay. But regardless, they were taking a trip. They weren't gone for a 2-week vacation. They weren't even going to be gone for a 3-month vacation, okay? They were going to be gone for some time. And they had to get everything on, all of the food on, and everything ready to go. And I want you to see that Noah did everything that God said. And again, we see Noah's faith. Because God told Noah, it's going to rain. Whatever that is. But whatever it is, it must be bad because it's going to destroy everything. So I've got to hurry up and get everything on because whatever this rain is, it's coming. Okay? And maybe it's something to do with water because, again, we built a boat out here in the middle of nowhere. So probably, but what is rain? Because he never experienced it. No one ever did. And when those first drops of rain fell, could you imagine what everybody was like? Because Noah was telling them, this is going to happen. Repent. Crazy man building a boat out in the middle of nowhere. Why should we listen to him? Until the rain came. And I want you to see that Noah was a man of faith. He didn't just believe God, he believed him enough to build the boat. He believed him enough to do something that was crazy. Because in that time, with their equipment, with their tools, with their knowledge, to build a boat with 3 levels that could float with that many things on it, could you imagine the weight that was in that thing alone with all the animals? I can't. But in faith, Noah believed. And because Noah had faith, he got in the boat. And because Noah had faith, God kept the covenant. Now, we're going to touch on this next week because I'm out of time. But I want you to see that the first covenant happens with Noah. Not with Adam and Eve, but with Noah. As a matter of fact, you've already read it, that I will use this to keep my covenant with you. And there is going to be something that shows Noah that this covenant is actually happening and taking place. And I'm not talking about the rainbow yet, okay? Because if you think I was talking rainbow, nope, something happens before rainbow that shows that this was the covenant, okay? That all happens next week. So next week we get to talk about, how long were they on the boat? You know, what did the earth look like before and after the flood? And was there a difference? And how long were they on that boat, right? And I know I said that already, but I want you to see that when we go through this, you're going to be going, they had to have been going stir crazy because 450 feet is not enough space for how long they were on this boat, okay? I'm just going to throw it out there because, again, it's more than 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights would be enough for drive me stir crazy, okay? I'm just saying. It's one of the reasons Ginger and I have never gone on a cruise because I think both of us are not people who like just sitting, and 3 nights or more on a boat just sitting would be like torture for me, okay? I couldn't do it. Just couldn't. And then you make it only 450 feet long and having to take care of animals. Like you have to clean out horses' pens. Oh, I forget, you're not from Bloomfield, where they had the horses. We had a lady in the church who had horses, and she invited me over once, and that was as close as I got to that pen after that. I thought it was bad cleaning up after my dog. And they had some big animals. But in faith, Noah did. And God rewarded him for his faith. You know, God asks us to do crazy things all the time. Yes. And in faith, will we do it? In faith, will we believe? In faith, will we follow? In faith, will we do and be who he's called us to be? Hopefully you will. Because he probably won't tell you to do something as crazy as build an ark. But he is going to tell you to do something. Because he wants us to respond to him in faith. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you today for your word, and we ask, Lord, that you would increase our faith. Father, help us in our ability to believe and do what you've called us to do, to be who you've called us to be, to know, Father, when you speak to us so that we can listen and obey. So, Father, today we ask that you would be with us. Again, let your love and grace overshadow us. And Father, love us beyond what we know. Help us to continue to be righteous before you in a wicked world, and help us to realize that we are not alone because you are here with us. So, Father, grant us the faith that we need to believe. In Jesus' name, amen. So, next week, we get to again talk about more of the flood. Did the earth just flood because of rain? Well, we're going to ask that question. Was this the first time anyone experienced rain? Well, we kind of already went there, but we'll talk about it again. How did God show love and confirm his covenant with Noah? Again, not the rainbow, that was coming, but there's something that happens before. How did the flood change the earth? How high was the flood waters, and how long was Noah and his family on that ark? Well, all of that we look at next week. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. God bless. We will see you this Sunday.